Okay. So today, what I plan to cover is converter. Like I think we briefly discussed it. I will cover that in detail today, and we'll look at a couple of demos. Then we'll go to router. Router is again very. All of the components that I'm covering today are the ones that you'll probably use in more than 70 to 80% of your iflows, right? So these are small things, and we'll practice them individually, and then we'll slowly combine them, right? As I was saying, so in these demos also I'll try to build upon the previous concepts, but as we progress we'll try to build more complex, once we've covered all the basic things. So converter, then router, multicast, and then splitter. So these are the concepts that I'd like to cover today. Hopefully we can cover them all. If not, then obviously we'll park some of it to the next one. Right, so all of these are one of the palette functions. So in the CPI window that we see, right, all the functions when we open a designer in the iFlow are called as palette functions, right? So it's a built-in functionality which BTP environment, CPI environment gives us. Okay. All right. So what is converter? Converter is very simple. That you'll often get cases where you have a JSON payload coming in, but like I said, this is a very common thing, very common thing, because for mapping we typically prefer. It supports XML by default, and XML not just for mapping. XML is also handy within the CPI. Maybe in future it will change, but as of now, or it is very handy because CPI supports XPath expressions. So XPath expressions, I think we briefly covered, right? So you can pick up an element, you can pick up a value of element using XPath, right? XPath is referred to that. So for that, or maybe for other reasons. So JSON to XML is a very common use case, right? But then it could be reverse case as well. Let's say you did a JSON to XML, and then on the return, but you're returning some response to the caller, and the caller is obviously REST based. So you need to return them JSON based payload. So again, you need to reverse convert it, right? So we have JSON to XML, XML to JSON, then we have CSV to XML, then we have these are more like a payload based, and all of them are payload based, but these are more like used for the parsing of elements, right? But then there are things like base 64. Base 64 is also the one which we often used. So base 64, if you don't know it already, is it's a sort of a encoding come encryption format, I would say. Compression come encryption format, right? So it is a very low level of encryption, if you will, right? So base 64 is you pass your payload to it, it converts to a some hexadecimal sort of magic values which you cannot interpret with your normal eyes, right? Or if you put it in a notepad, you will not be able to read it. But anybody else, meaning that any other application who has the ability to decode a base 64, they can decode and read it, right? So that's why it's a very low level of encryption. And then there are others like Banbury flat file and all of that, right? So what we will look at today is JSON to XML being the most common use case, and XML to JSON, the reverse. And then when we get to SFTP adapter, right? SFTP as adapter is when we play around with files, right? So when we need to communicate via files, file protocol, SFTP protocol, basically. Then probably we'll also look at the CSV to XML. All right. So let's start with it. The basics we've just covered. Now I have pre-made some iflows. Let me. Okay. Let me start with a very basic iflow. So here I did nothing but from the scratch. I created a integration process. So you know that sender, integration process, and receiver comes by default, and then I connect sender to the start, and obviously then I have set the endpoint to call it JSON to XML, and then I've dragged the if I put sorry converter. So I've just dragged the JSON to XML converter. It's not in edit mode, that's why it's showing. So, and then after I drag it, so my idea is that from the I'll send a JSON payload from Postman tool, and then pass it to XML using this converter, built-in converter, and then I'll obviously see the same response because there's no receiver, so it will just return response back to the caller. So this is a typical sync scenario. All right. So if you see, I have not done pretty much any customizing to it. So if when you drag it, you get these options. and slowly we'll build upon this. So basic is that, okay, what's your JSON prefix separator, right? So if you look at this payload, for example, so this is the prefix, right? So I separate my uh, fields of my JSON body by this column, but it can be in other formats as well. So whatever you have the payload, accordingly you can just choose this. And then we'll look at, there are two more options: add XML root element, and then namespace mapping. So XML, remember we did SOAP protocol with request reply. So that is all XML. So XML as a language with SOAP protocol is very strict on the syntax of it, and in some cases the target party which receives it also requires namespace to be present in the payload, and that's why these both of these options. So sometimes it could be that your XML, you form the XML but you need a root element, right? So that uh, this option can enable you. So if you are slowly able to grasp the concepts, right? So my aim will always be that we work on the concepts. If you see, this same thing we can also do without the adapters converter, right? We can do some scripting, or using content modifier we can try to play around, but for that we'll have to do a lot of multiple steps. So with all of these palettes, it's a built-in process which inbuilt code is taking care of it. It's giving you a GUI simple options, drag and drop, or options to choose from, and that's how your job is made easy by these functions. So let's look at a quick run of it. Where is my, so JSON to XML? If you see, I have the endpoint here. I have a very simple payload. It's order payload where I have the header segment as order. Under it I have ID and customer, and then it has items. If you know a little bit about how SAP as an ERP functions, is typically it will have a header, it will have an item, right? So that is the same scenario we're trying to replicate here. All right, so it's already deployed, I think. So let me just switch on the trace. We may not need it, but let's still do it. Okay, let me remove for a second. Just to show you from a blank state, what I would like to do is cause a syntax error. Okay, now I will restore it back. Okay, so now what happened is it converted it into XML format, keeping the structure as same. But if you see, XML works on tags, starting tag and closing tag, and then similarly, so it converted very well. So items is repeated multiple times. Each item has SQ and quantity, and then it nicely did it. And then for all XML payloads, the XML version and encoding is mandatory. So it added that as well. Okay, so very simple flow, nothing fancy there. Right? So if you see CPI helper, I hope you have used some of these features where you can utilize this. So if I see beautify, is it does that, and if I look at before converter, this is how my payload looks like, and after the conversion, it looks like properly converted into XML format. Okay, fairly simple. Any questions on this one? I'm just going to add a few more scenarios on it to show you.
No questions.
Now, let's look at the scenario, which is very very useful. That oftentimes what will happen is I'll have a JSON payload, and then it will convert to XML, and then in between I will have a mapping. We'll try to do that scenario also, and I do that mapping using the XML payload, and then I want the payload back to JSON. So here what I've seen is basically, if you see, you have this, and then XML to JSON is JSON prefix, right? So if now that I'm using XML to JSON, my options are a bit different, right? So when I create my JSON, right, back, what separator do I want? Do I want a column, right? And from where do you want to read the JSON output encoding, right? And then what is my XML element, right? So let's quickly have a look at that. Let me put this one in place as well.
Why it has more options? It is same, right?
No, because both languages are different, right? So, I mean, for JSON, you have some additional properties like JSON array, for example. I'll show you this. I think this is pretty interesting. So, if you look at my payload here, right? So, if you, this curly braces depicts a structure, and this kind of angular bracket, right? The rectangular bracket depicts my array. You know what is array, right? Array is multiple values, like a table, right? So that's one additional setting here, right? Then JSON um, as a language also has something called as so. This is related to the array concept, right? Streaming is that when you have multiple values, you want to stream them as an array, right? So that is linked to the same concept, right? And then in some cases, you may not want a root element, right? Let's say I don't want the order, right? I just want this payload to be processed. I can just select this. So some of the the languages are different, right? So accordingly, they've given some more options. Okay, so if I execute this, so if you see, I have been able to get the exact same payload, but I have a difference here. If you can tell me what is the difference between both of these payloads.
So instead of square brackets, we have curly brackets after items.
Hmm.
Like it is not array.
Yeah, and there is a square brackets at order, and why is that?
Mm.
Because I've specified it here, right?
So
So one second. Okay, so I said streaming convert XML elements to JSON array specified ones. So I selected order. Now let me put this to item. One second. What is my payload? So let's see the payload once. I just want to see the payload one. So okay, can you tell me what should be specified here? Let's try items and see what happens. Okay, did it work? No, right? You still have a curly braces. Can you
mm.
guess why it didn't work?
No, I don't think
Because
so.
XML works on the XPath concept. Okay, we have a when it I showed you the XML payload, right? And that is the reason I had gone there. Just wanted to see the what is the kind of payload. So XML, if you see, works on the XPath. You cannot just it's like a wrapper, right? You have a wrapper order, under it you have a wrapper called items, and under it you have SKU and other. So if I want to access items, I'll have to do it order slash items, or I'll have to do a double slash items. Let's see order. I'm always confused between the backslash and the forward slash. Okay.
Forward.
Okay. See, so that is probably you will now be able to relate why there are so many options, right? So, um, you know, because it works differently. So JSON, see, pretty interesting thing. So when a long back when I was working in PIPO, that time REST was just getting popular in the market. So SOA was all like most of the web services were based on XML payloads, and SOA was the buzzword, right? So REST was introduced because of its lightweight. Because if you see, XML has to have all of these tags and starting tag, end tag, and then you have namespace mapping. Namespace specification, version, and all of that. So that's done for a good cause, because having mentioning all of these, the service is more robust. But then the problem is that the other party which needs to call has to do a lot of settings for that, right? So REST was introduced to be a lightweight, but then if you see, REST does not have any restriction, right? So it's more of a free flow. There's a syntax. So that's why sometimes it will not give you an error. Let's say if I send the payload without this brackets also, it will not give me an error. But what will happen is it will only consider one, because it's a structure. It will probably consider the last. Let's say I'm sending this payload and it is creating an order based on this. So it's probably have just one item, right? So that is the reason. So that is why both languages are a bit different, and so the options as well. Okay. Um, so just something to maybe. I mean, what I would encourage you for all of the palettes that we are covering today, I will show you a basic use of it with some obviously with the variations that I feel are important. But what I would like you to do is try all of these options, see where you're getting error and why you're getting error. That will truly make you the understand the concepts even better.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So
So in the projects, in the real projects
hmm,
for JSON to XML, if I want to convert again from XML to JSON, then in between we can give some logic or something if we want to send it to any system, right?
logic meaning.
Means
Give me an
if there
example.
are, yeah, if from ECC we are getting three material numbers, but on the other side of the on the other system,
Hmm.
I just want first material number to be printed.
Hmm.
So we can apply that logic before converting it into JSON again, right?
Yes, yes, yes. That will be a good practice to do, because if you don't need, let's say there are three materials and you don't need two of them, then it's better to just access the first one, and so that because the number of elements in your payload, the flow has to process all of that, right? So the smaller your payload will be, the better performance it will be for the iFlow as well.
So where do we put that logic? Like in the converters, I don't think we will have some
Converter,
content
no,
modifier.
no, no. Converter, see, it may happen accidentally. For example, the scenario that I gave you, but that is not a good way, right? So there
Mhm.
are two options. One is to do it at if I were you, the most simplest thing for me to be using is either a Groovy script or something called as XSLT mapping. There's something
Mhm.
called as XSLT mapping, which is used pretty heavily for doing all of this, to remove an element, to extract one single element, right? Or then Groovy is easy. Or if it's a simple scenario where you want to transform the values, then graphical mapping is the best for that. So the one scenario that you are telling, most use cases XSLT mapping for that.
Okay.
Okay, nursing is here too. Okay, so nursing, we're covering the converters today. Converter is one of the palettes. Okay. So one scenario that I also wanted to show you is the option of, remember in the JSON to XML I showed two options which we haven't used so far: namespace mapping and root element. Right. So in this one I have added a root element. You can name it anything. It need not be always root. It depends on what your target payload looks like, and you want to add a root element, and that's what you can just select it. So in this case I selected that, and let's run this case. So see, in my original payload, I have no like nothing above order. Right, order is the highest element. But in this case, the target element, I have root, then order, and then rest of the payload as is. And now, if you are wondering why would someone do that, now this is the scenario that I was telling you with XML. Sometimes there are cases like you converted, you have an XML payload, and you converted it to, let's say, JSON, right? Or you just not really JSON, but essentially that what you need is you need the inside material of it, right? You don't really need order, and you just need to play around with ID and customer, for example, right? So in that case, you would remove the element, and then finally, if you have to send it back, you will add the element. So that is the use case of it. Now, in the same flow, let me tell you the namespace mapping as well, and then I'll take your questions if you have any on that. So in the same thing, what I've done in another case is to add the namespace mapping. So namespace also is one of the ways where XML body travels. So namespace is particularly required by some systems where they want to recognize the payload in a certain way, and that's how namespace are a requirement, right? So it could be like anything. It is generally a HTTP full URL address, and the primary purpose of it is to identify a payload, nothing more, right? It's not used in any logic. It's more like completing your payload in a syntax manner, right? So in this case, I am adding in the JSON to XML converter a XML namespace. Now I selected this, and then it asks me against what JSON prefix element I want to add the namespace. Where is my namespace mapping? So right now, if you see, I have a different payload where I have a customer ID. Within the customer, I have ID, name, and country. Very simple. Now, at what stage you want to add a namespace? So namespace is typically at the very root element of the complete payload, not a root. Let's say I have multiple customers. In that case, it will not be at this level. It will probably be at root element. But ultimately, you don't have to. even remember which level it should be, because it will depend on what kind of payload you get. Let's say you're interacting with a third party, it gives you a service, and its service has a namespace. So you will get the sample payloads from them, and using that, you will see that okay, at this stage, my namespace needs to be added. So remember, so if you see, I've just added this here, and I've said customer, and it added here. Let me show you exactly what I was trying to say earlier. Uh, so I changed it to customer ID. Let's try now. Oops. What is the change? Customer ID, JSON prefix. It should be correct. It's activated also. Let's see. Level 2. Am I executing the right one? L2, L2. Oh, okay. Sorry. So I think my bad. I explained it wrongly. One second. So basically, the namespace is added at the root only by default, but it is just that with the namespace, what is the JSON prefix that I want to append, right? So if I just say test prefix, then it will just append the same value. So some namespace you'll see that XML NS colon P1 is equal to this. So prefix is primarily used to shorten. Let's say in my iFlow, I want to use this prefix at multiple places. So I will use a prefix, and typically it's something like a P1 or a N0 or N1, right? So right, so that is the prefix, and okay, I'll show you. I was just trying to show you something. I will show you in some other iFlow where, in today's only, I think I've made a scenario where this prefix work will be shown further. Okay, so that is all about converter. Any questions so far? You guys still there with me, right?
Yeah, no
Okay,
questions.
okay, cool. All right, so now we'll go to the router. So in technical programming language, if I want to tell you what is a router is your if-else condition. Simple, very simple, right? So see, although so all of these functions are enabling you to essentially make a scenario, right? Obviously, because there'll be no productive scenario where you are just passing through, right? You're not doing anything in CPI. You'll at least do something, right? Uh, you know, there could be maybe one or two pass through scenarios as well, but even in that, maybe you'll need to encode or something like that, bro. So if it had been a programming language, then you know the syntax, and you can just write if else when you need if else. You can write display when you want to display, and you can call a function, all of that. So it's very simple, right? But it's a no code, low code platform wherein if you want to write a logic, then you need all of these palettes, right? So if else is a very basic thing which is required everywhere, right? So that is what your router is. So in this case, what I've done is, if you see, I've used a JSON to XML converter, and I put a router here, right? So obviously you can search a router here, right? And a router will give you if else scenario. If and so what you do is, in when you put a router in the branch, right? So from your router, you extend a branch to your target place. So there you write a condition. So in this case, and you can mark one of the router as one of the branch as default, right? If you it's like a else, or if you want, you can write a proper condition as well. So it's not that marking it is default as a condition, right? It's exactly same as your if else condition. If you want to write a specific condition, so in this case, I'm marking it as default that okay, if so the condition that I'm checking here is if my type in my payload. So let me show you my payload as well. So this is my payload, right? Customer ID, type, and order amount. So if my customer type is premium, then I want the route to go to a specific place, which is this one, and in this I will write premium customer. And if not, then it will go into the default route. So this is a very very common thing, right? You can yourself also imagine in whatever technologies you are working. So if in CPI especially, there are a lot of scenarios where if the payload has a particular condition, let's say my order is belonging to plant X, then I want to send the payload to let's say a particular web service or API. If my order is from plant Y, then I want to send it to somewhere else, right? So very simple case. Now I will execute this and then I will show you the magic in the trace. So right now my payload is standard. I think I'm using the wrong one here. Demo router. Hmm. Okay, I think. Okay. All right. Let's see now. So, since I had written in a content modifier, in this content modifier, that okay, standard to standard. If I make it premium, then it will show me premium. Simple if else condition, right? Nothing fancy there. I Let me show you. Yes, router with multicast. Okay, now multicast. What is multicast? Multicast is basically it's like a fan out. I mean, this is more like the integration concepts terminology. Fan out. Fan out means that it basically sends your message to multiple branches. Now, there are two kinds of multicast. One is sequential multicast, and one is parallel multicast, right? So, as the name suggests, so sequential multicast is that if you put a multicast, it will first, based on the sequence that you specify, it will first send the data to first branch and then send the data to second branch. And in case of parallel, it will send to both at the same time. Now, typically, when we work, it's not a good practice. We are always discouraged to use parallel multicast because it increases the load, but sometimes that is a necessity, right? There can be very often requirement that I want to send it to multiple requirements. So let's see. Now, I have built a scenario to depict the kind of real-time thing because right now we are only playing within the box of CPI with Postman, right? Now, so if you see now our iFlow complexity is growing slowly. This is also a simple one, but from our perspective, we were using only one palette. Now this is growing to multiple palettes. So what is the scenario? Let me first explain you the scenario. So same scenario as the previous one. I have a same payload. If you see, exact same payload, right? But the only difference right now is that I will first check um, the type of customer. If the customer is premium, I will just write premium here and end the flow. But if the customer is not premium, anything else from premium, it may be standard, it may be anything else, then I am sending it to two receivers simultaneously. So if you see here, I've used parallel multicast. Now it will be very interesting to see in the trace. I'll show you the details in trace. In the parallel multicast, I have two branches. If you see, parallel multicast has no properties because its job is very simple. It will just distribute your payload to number of branches that you set. So it will send the first payload here, second payload here, and first payload I'm sending to Postman Echo, and the second payload I'm sending to HTTP bin. Simple, the same services that we have been using. They are the sort of a dummy services that we are using to play around, right? So simple scenario. Any questions on what scenario do you have, or you want me to first run?
So I think this is like with CPI gets a request from third party, or and if we have multiple systems here in ECC or in SAP environment, so in which system the request will be routed. So it is handling this thing, right? Is it right?
So that is done by router. Parallel multicast is that I have a payload which I want to send to two different APIs at the same time, two different receivers. Let's say I have a payload which I want to send to Ariba and SuccessFactors both together. Okay, let me show you. I think when I run it, it'll be even more clearer, and I'll show you in detail. We'll go through the trace. So if you see, it takes a bit longer than our usual flows, which just executes within microseconds. So if you see my, obviously there's nothing fancy here. Okay. So if you see, now my payload traveled from here. It carried a very basic payload. The conversion happened at this stage, right? And then after that, it in my router, it checked what is the value. So it was not standard, so it continued here, the default route. And in the default route, it met with parallel multicast. So parallel multicast duplicated my payload, right? It created two payloads, and one came here, and here I called request reply because I wanted to call an external service, and then here I just directly called a different service. So Postman. So both of these services, maybe for nursing's knowledge, we've been using it. It is just like whatever you will send, it will return back. So this is nothing. These services are doing nothing but just mimicking your payload. If you see the second service, it shows my same payload along with other properties as well. Now let's go to the detailed trace. Okay. So whenever you want to see how exactly your payload travel, a detailed trace is most handy in that case. So if you see after the router, there's the same flow. After the router, it went to parallel multicast and it splitted the payload, right? So if you see at this stage, my payload is converted, right? I think it is, that's why I was showing. I think this is maybe a CPI error where it is showing because ideally it should show only twice. And if you see, there is no message also available. So maybe this is a some sort of a bug. Right. This also. Okay. Show me. Okay, so it splitted the payload, and you will always also see that first it went to this service. Where is my? Okay, I think it is overwriting the content from this. I just wanted to show you that it is first gone to the Postman service and then it went to the other one. But so there is this. So if you see this header, the headers, right? Camel HTTP URL, and there's one more Camel HTTP URI, which it is not displaying right now. So typically, when you call a HTTP service, this header value will get overwritten, right? We sometimes face issues with using because of this as well. So I was just trying to see maybe it is appearing that our initial endpoint is overwriting all of the Camel HTTP URL headers, right? But eventually, it is first calling the Postman, and then it is calling the HTTP bin value. Just trying to find it for you. But anyways, I think the that evidence is clear because you're seeing this, right? Now let me show you a variation. What if I want to control it, right? I want to see that, okay, very normal scenario, right? Let's say I called Postman Echo Service, it returned me some value, right? And that value, I want to use it in my next step, right? Very common and this thing, very common scenario. Come on. Okay. All right. So let's do a variation now. What I'll do is I will add a sequential multicast. Okay. And I'll add it here. So let's not remove anything. I will just build upon the same scenario. Okay. Content modifier. Okay, so and so that's just the first part. When I set a sequential multicast, I have to specify the order, right? Remember? So if I select the sequential multicast, I will have this tab called routing sequence. The routing sequence is branch one will execute first and then branch two. So branch one is this one, right? So first this branch will execute where again the payload will be divided into two. And once this is finished, then my branch two will execute, and hopefully I should be able to see this end of flow as the message. Okay, let's deploy it. Okay, it's up and running. Let me run it. All right. So as expected, let's look at the trace also. So if you can see, it went to branch one first, and then it did all of these, and then it came here, right? So if you want to spice it up a little bit, then what we can do is we can. Okay, that's one is branch two. Okay. So what I did was that okay, now let's do the reverse way. First, do the branch two first, and then the other one. So any guesses on what the output will be when I trigger it? Okay. All right. So since my branch one executed the last this time, then it came here. It did all of this. So if I show you quickly. So when it came here, it ended the message, right? And then again, the sequence went in this direction, and then it called these two, right? So if you see how many concepts have we used, which we have covered so far. So converter, then content modifier was our very basic thing, a router, and multicast. So this something like this is a very good thing to practice on this. So I'll stop for a logical break here, but let me know if you have any questions up till now. Then we'll quickly cover the splitter. No questions?
Sachin, can we do splitter in the next class?
Okay, sure,
I have
we
to
can.
log in actually now.
Oh, okay, okay, I understand.